Now let's take a look at working with the excerpt. If we come into the excerpt, we'll see that there are no parameters that are accepted, so it's just the excerpt and that is it. It is possible to modify the excerpt with filters, which we will look at later on in our hook section, but for now we just have the excerpt. So if we're to come back to our index.php file and change the content read more for our blog listing page to just be the excerpt, again, no parameters, what we would see on our blog page is that the posts that had the more tag listed in the content cut off right there with the excerpt. For other articles, it's going to be based on how long they are, or like in a gallery, for example, it won't show the gallery, it'll just stop there. Now, it is possible in a specific post to insert in a custom excerpt. And once that is saved and you come back to view the blog posts, we will see that we have a custom excerpt there. So this is how the excerpt works. It's very common. It's nice to have the excerpt field so that you could set something custom, especially if you're concerned about length or things like that. And then if we were to come in, let's see, to our sticky post, let's remove that more tag now. And we'll come back and look at the blog page. Notice that it has this ... here. So if you don't like that approach and you want to just have a custom excerpt instead, at this point, these are your options. So it will automatically create an excerpt. It will use the custom excerpt field, or if there is a more tag, it will use that, or it will just cut it off like this where it thinks it is appropriate. Again, we could change this with filters later on, but at this point, that's the excerpt. So if you haven't played around with it yet, go ahead and check it out. But don't worry, again, too much about practice at this point, because we will pull everything in together at a certain point. So let's move on from the excerpt now and look at the category. Now, the category is what's used to display a list of categories for a post. And it could do this in a couple different formats, either as an HTML list or a custom format that we might want something else done. And we have a few parameters being passed. We have the separator. So by default, it'll give us a bunch of unordered list items, and if we want to have them just separated by comma as a string, we could do that. We could determine how parents are structured. It doesn't give the information here, but if we come down to the very bottom, we could see the options here. A contributor posted them up. We could either have multiple or single, and we'll look briefly at what that is. I don't think it's really going to be something that you're going to be concerned with using most likely. And also we have post ID, which is by default not used, but if you wanted to get the category and you had a specific post ID for it, you could just query this directly. Inside of the loop, it'll automatically figure out what needs to be displayed, but if you wanted to maybe use it outside of it, you could pass in a post ID directly. So let's look at the category now in our code. So what I've done, I'm coming into my single.php and I've set up a template part called byline. So if we come into template parts, byline.php has our categories. It also has the tags, which we'll look at separately. But notice that I'm setting up some escaped HTML or some text here that can be translated later on. Again, we'll look at that later on. We haven't really talked about this in depth. We will get here. But we have to say categories at some level, and this is better than just hard coding it in as just regular text. Then we see the category. We're going to separate them by commas, and we don't have anything being passed for the parent. We'll come to this one in a second, but it's basically just blank, which is the same as doing this for now. So let's look at this on the front end of our site. And we'll see if we come into a specific post, notice that we could see the categories are all listed there. Now, if we were to change this and not pass any parameters, so just leaving it blank, notice that now we get an unordered list. And you could style this to be inline and look the same, but I find that it's nice to just have them as a string of text in this particular context. So that's why we have that. Now, if we were to do single, let's start with multiple. Again, this is how it's treating parent and child categories. So we're setting this to multiple. And let's come over and look at our site and notice that we see our parent category and then child category, but then we see parent category again. Now these are parent-child categories, and if we were to remove this, so now it has nothing. Notice that it doesn't have the parent one there before. So what this is saying, if you set up multiple, is that anytime you're showing a child category, show the parent category before it. And it's listing them as two separate categories. Now, if we were to set this to single, which is the other option, you can see that parent category, comma, child category is listed as one category. So depending on your site architecture, this may be helpful. I'm guessing it's probably not in most contexts. Just using the category with a separator is going to be enough. But that is the category covered, and it is a little bit different than tags. So let's look at tags next. So tags has a few more parameters. Notice here's the category. It has the separator, parents, and post ID. Tags has before the separator and after. So what this allows us to do is we could insert some text before it, like here are the tags, and then determine what the separator is. Also, if you wanted to have something after the tags were over. So these are the different parameters. Let's take a look at it in our code. Now notice that with the category, because category doesn't accept a before and after, we had to put category as its own line when we wanted to write that text. But to do the same thing with tags, we could pass it in as the before parameter and then separate them out by commas. So here's what that looks like on the site. We could see in our, let's come into our Hello World post, we could see the tags are WordPress. Now, if we were to remove this parameter, so just say tags before but have no separator, we could see that unlike before, it is not going to give us an unordered list. So it's still just going to output them as their string there. So we'll put that back. And then finally, we could do something afterwards if we wanted. And we can see we now have a pipe character after tags. And tags is smart because if there are no tags with something, they won't show up. Notice there's no tags here, so they're not showing up. If we had no categories, we'd still have the word categories displaying there unless we ran some conditional code. So that is the end of tags. Again, very helpful. You're probably just going to need maybe the before and the separator. You probably won't need after, but it's all there in case you need it. So at this point, I think we have looked at what is a small handful of the most common template tags you're going to be using as it relates to displaying post content. Again, post content can also mean page content, it can mean custom post type content, and it can mean traditional blog post content. Now, hopefully at this point, you've also had the chance to practice with some of these. If you want to go and explore each of them in a little bit more, you could open up the example files and pass in different parameters and play around with it in different ways. But what we'll do from here is we'll keep going with post tags, and we'll start looking at date tags next, which are also very common, but kind of are their own subset to look at on their own.